guys. I'm just coming in. Let's see if we can get some people in here. Alrighty guys, so today I am going to talk to you guys about my upcoming class. First of all, I'm Morgan Mattson. I teach at Greenville High School and I run my own ceramic business. I am talking to you today specifically about a class that I'm doing at the GCCA this summer, specifically for teens. So if you are not a teenager, we'll try to have another class coming up soon. But if you are interested or if you need somebody else that's interested, we can get to that later. But today I'm going to show you what we will be doing in that class and demoing it and explaining it a little bit better. So first of all, we're looking at platter building. So if you are not from a platter, would be like a flat tray of some sort to hold something. And the idea of sgraffitoing would be the fact that we would have a layer of underglaze. This is a green underglaze, and then you're carving back through. So you can hear it's like there's a divot in there, and this will let you design your platter. So we would put a layer of underglaze on there, and I would carve back through with a trimming tool, and you can design whatever you want on there. So here is another example, if you can kind of see that. There's this texture on there. This one didn't turn out so great, but you can see that this platter is more like a bowl. It's got little feet on it, so we would talk about how to add them on there and also how to build our platters. So today, I'm going to show you guys how to build them, so it should be pretty easy to give you an idea of what you would be doing in the class or what's available. And then along with that, we're also going to look at Sgraffito and figuring out how that works and what we would do. If you guys have questions or comments or concerns, you guys can follow me at Morgan Mattson Ceramics. So let me turn this around for a second so we can get set up for that. But Morgan Mattson Ceramics here on Instagram. My email is morganmattsonart.com, so you can email me if you have any questions, concerns, comments, and the class is on July 23rd. So this is pretty important. It's a 2-day class, so you want to make sure that you're prepared to go 2 days in a row. So what we're going to do first of all is we are going to, let me get this camera set up a little bit better. We're going to talk about how to hand build a slab first. So we have our clay here, and I started to flatten it out earlier so that way I wouldn't shake the table around so much. But we're going to start by flattening your clay to make our slab. So I'm just going to roll this guy out a little bit more. Sorry if the table is wobbling around. It's not the best table for this, but we make do. So when you're making your platter, you want to think about what shape and what size, preferably before you cut into the clay. I mean, you can go back and fix it because clay is pretty good with that kind of thing, but you want to make sure that you're starting to thin it out and give it a consistency that works best for you. But also you want to think about, is it going to be an oval tray? Is it going to be a square tray? Is it going to be a perfect circle? You can trace something if you're going to make it a perfect circle, or if you found this rectangle that is just the best rectangle for a platter, you could always trace something like that. But generally, making a more unique shape would make it a more exciting platter because then it's your design, your shape. So I'm just kind of rolling this out and thinking about the thickness of it. So I'm trying to keep it as even as possible while I'm rolling because I don't want it to get super thin on one side and super thick on another side. So I'm trying to put even pressure on my rolling pin as I do this. All those lines on there, we'll fix that in a minute. Right now I'm just getting my platter lined up. So I think for this one I'm going to make it, I guess maybe an oval one. I like a good oval platter. I'm going to take this, this is a rib, and I'm going to use this to kind of compress the clay, flatten it, smooth it out. Not that you can probably see it on the camera, but there's a bunch of little lines in my clay, and I don't want those there. And I can just try to clean it up a little bit. And we can clean it up later too. It's not the end of the world, but I like to get a good face on here first. So here's this. We've got a nice even slab, and it's bigger than what I want my platter to be, which is important because we're going to cut off pieces of our slab here, and if you know, we had too much of, or if we don't have enough, we would have to break it down a little more. So here's this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just eyeball what I want to do. Some people might measure things out to make it perfect, but actually I'm not going to use this. I'm going to use my finger, and I'm just going to think about how I want this to be here. So maybe I'll kind of bring it around to a point over here. I'm going to make it more circular than oval, and I'm just kind of adding this divot in here so you can kind of see that divot on there, so that way I can get a general idea of my shape. That way if I don't like it, I can always go back and I can smooth it out a little bit more until I'm happy with it. From that, I'm going to cut off my extra. So I'm going to get close. I'm trying to cut in away from the edges so I don't get any of those cracks that might form. I mean, you might make it right up to the edge, and that's sometimes okay, but sometimes you'll get little cracks that form because there's already a crack in the edge of the clay there from when you rolled it out. So you want to be careful with that. So here is my oval, my general oval, and I can remove that extra. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to make sure that I squish it up so I can reuse it later. So with this, you have a couple options when you have a platter. You can either A, add extra pieces of clay along the side, so I could roll this back out and I could add like a little wall all the way around to create the edge that way, and I've made a lot of platters like that. Or if it's big enough and you're happy with the size, you could also start to manipulate the edges just by bending them up. So usually if I have a bigger platter like this, and I mean it's going to shrink a little bit in the kiln, and that's expected, but we want to make sure that if I don't like how big this is, I might want to, or I don't want it to get any smaller. Like this is the place where I'm going to put a bunch of appetizers, and I'm going to have crackers on here, and I want a big space. So I might want to add an edge like this. Or I can also, again, kind of prop this edge up here like this, which is what I think I'm going to do for now because I kind of like the edge of this. And I'm just going to go around and I'm just going to lift that edge up a little bit. So it doesn't look like too much is happening. And usually you would want your clay to rest a little bit, and so it wouldn't be so wet. Because it makes it a lot harder for it to stand up, but for our time purposes, we're just going to go for it. So I have this edge here, and then once I get that shape that I want, I might be like, oh, well, this side's bigger than this side, or whatever's wrong. I can always go back and trim off extra. I can go back with a rib, so this is a different rib, but I like to use that rounded edge there, and I can go back and I can start to make that edge happen there. I might smooth the actual edge of the platter because you can see it's starting to wiggle there. I might want to go back and fix that when it's a little bit more dry. Another thing with your platters is sometimes I add a handle to my platters. So I have like a handle at each edge of it so it would be easier to pick up. So what you could always do is do something like, let's move that there. I could build a handle and I could attach it. I mean, I know this doesn't look that great, but you could kind of pull out a handle. You could roll out another slab if you want to do that, and you can start to add that on there or get an idea of the shape. Maybe you just want a little ball of clay on the edge like this, so it's a little larger on the lip, and that way you can pick it up with something extra. So it's kind of up to you when you design your own platter for what you would want to do. The limits are pretty much endless, and when I was playing around with these yesterday, I had a little bit more fun because I usually just make the basic platter that's kind of like this. It's just, you know, we looked at this before. It has the bench lip edge that I just showed you. It's got the oval I just showed you. It doesn't even have any feet on it. It's just plain on the bottom. So you could always add, I've been adding a circular ring to the bottom of some of my pots that elevates it and kind of makes it more of a fruit bowl or something like that. You could always add like little balls of clay on the bottom, or if you want to roll out a coil, so you could roll out one long coil on there and have that go around the bottom. So you have lots and lots of options with this. Right now, since this is so wet, I don't really want to touch this anymore, so I'm just going to scoot it over a little bit so we have more room. And I can show you the platter that I made yesterday. See, look at that, already fell back down over here. So we're going to leave that one over here, and I'm going to show you some more fun stuff. So when we're making our platters and we're using our Sgraffito, this is where it starts to get a little bit more personal. So we want to think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and you could basically do whatever you want. So I started with some sketches on here. Hopefully these will show up. They won't be too dull. And I was playing around. I really like stingrays lately, so I've been trying to play around with those guys. I've been playing around with the Black Lives Matter a lot since everything's been happening here. And then also because summer's happening, I'm really feeling those plants and hanging out at the house. And not that I haven't been doing that anyway because of the COVID-19. But I ended up with this one. So I did 4 kind of small sketches to kind of just figure out what I wanted. I just put them in an oval because I've been making typical oval platters. But then when I actually built this platter, it turned out to be much more square. So you can see here, it's more of a rectangle. I guess I shouldn't say square. And I actually added my handles on there too. And I tried something totally different. I've never done this before where I added this extra lip on the outside. Because you can see here I did what I showed you a second ago where I warped the edge and I kind of just added that little curve. But then, you know, like I said, you can kind of get a little bit more excited with these platters and you can really start to add slabs or extra things to really make it your own. So this one I actually decided to have a little bit more fun with. And then when I was sketching yesterday, coming up with my idea, I chose this one. Now, it's not perfect, and if you are a perfectionist and you get nervous about carving back through or something like that, worried you'll mess it up, you might want to have a really exact drawing before you start, because otherwise I might be like, okay, well, I'm writing it, oops, I messed up, and then you're stuck with that. You got to go back and fix it, and you can fix it. It's just a little bit more of a hassle. So I'm going to set up my sketch here real quick so I can see it. And I'm going to use some underglaze. So I have some black underglaze here. You could also use a colored slip if you like to use slips more. Underglaze basically means that you can put it on unfired clay. This is an unfired platter, which that means that it's going to go into the kiln once, it's going to come out, and it's going to go back in to get that shiny glaze on top. So with this, I have this unfired clay, just made it yesterday. It's not even close to being dry enough to go into the kiln. And you can see here, I started to add some underglaze in here because I wanted to make sure some of it would dry. So I can definitely make sure I show you the Sgraffito design on there. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to take a paintbrush. You can take any paintbrush, and I'm just going to start to dip in here and add what I want. So for my back to this guy for a second. When I did this, I did one layer, or actually I did multiple layers, but you can see I left it a little bit more transparent here because I wanted to see the brush strokes, make it a little bit more natural looking. But when I did that, I brushed it all on first, and then I went through and carved the whole thing. So I covered the whole platter down here with that green underglaze before I did anything else. For this one, I'm going to do it a little differently because I don't really want the whole base of this to be black. I want it to be mainly white and have the black flowers, so it's a black and white design. So instead of wasting a bunch of underglaze, putting it all in here and carving it back off, I'm going to just try to blob it in where I want the black design to go, because I don't want to just like waste all of my stuff on here. And as an artist, you guys might know that you want to kind of think about what you're doing so that way you don't waste your materials, because sometimes, not that underglaze is expensive, this is actually pretty cheap. But you don't want to just like waste your utensils. You want to make sure we can get the most out of them. So I'm just kind of blobbing this on here, and I just added water to this because it was getting a little gross. So it's a little bit weird consistency right now. Usually for underglaze, just like normal glazes, you want to have at least 3 coats so that way it doesn't get that liney quality like in the example I showed you with the deer on it. You can do a variety of things to make that work, and you don't have to do that, that's fine, but generally that's what you would want to do. So I'm just going on here, and I'm going to kind of add in some what's going to be little flowers blooming, and I'm not really worried about it being perfect right now because I am more worried about how I'm just getting this on here, because I'm going to go back through, and remember I'm going to carve through it to make that Sgraffito design. Here it goes. I'm just adding that on. You can kind of see, like on here, it's trying to get streaky, which means I probably want to go back over it and smooth it out a little bit and add some more underglaze. The edges too, I'm not too worried about those because it's the same thing. You might carve back through it and adjust those edges at the end, which would be great. So I'm just kind of having fun with this and going with the flow wherever I feel like a flower should go kind of thing. I'm not super worried about my design because I wanted it to be more whimsical and really just, this is addition to focusing on the words in the center, which are the important part. So I'm just kind of going through and I'm adding this growth of plants coming out of our center blob here. And you can use different size brushes too if you like to get, so I pulled out this tiny one because I wasn't liking the stems that I was doing here, so I'm going to go back in for these other stems and maybe add like a smaller line here, because otherwise it gets, you know, a little weird. If you have a shaky hand when you're painting, you could always prop your hand on your other hand or make sure it's on the table. Otherwise you might have some wiggly lines, but again, you can carve back through. It's not the end of the world if they're wiggly and you don't like them. It's an easy fix, because with ceramics, until it's fired, you really have a lot of freedom with what you're going to do and like how you're going to do it and that kind of thing. So you don't really have to worry quite as much about, oh, I messed this up, because you can either add a little water to it and smooth it out, or you could, you know, touch it up. It's kind of like paint, when you can keep painting over things, sort of. That's what I'm doing with this. I can add some more clay back on top, and then, you know, it'll be fine. So you have that option to do those things. When you're in the, if you sign up for the class, and when you're there, we'll talk about designs and stuff. You don't have to come with anything like that. We just want to get you thinking about what you'll be doing and what sounds so interesting about it. So I'm just going to add a couple of these blobs over here. I think we need some stuff down here maybe. And if you've taken ceramics classes before, that's great. I mean, the more the merrier. If you are from Greenville High School and you're like, why have I taken ceramics? This is a little bit different. We haven't done this in class yet. We were going to, but then COVID-19 happened, so we didn't really get the chance. But we'll have this available for pretty much any teenager, no matter what school you go to. You can sign up. If you want to sign up, you can go to the GCCA's website, and when you're there, you'll look through the summer camps and you'll find this one, Sgraffito Platters. I think it's called like Sgraffito and Hand Building Platters or something along those lines. And you'll see it says Morgan Mattson on there, and that's me. And that way you can sign up for it. So at this point, I'm just kind of touching up anything that looks kind of funky and weird. But I'm going to move my underglaze out of the way, and we're going to look at some carving. So you can use a variety of tools to carve. You could use a needle tool. So you could use that on there to just kind of carve back through and draw a line. I don't prefer this because it sometimes makes a little crumble on there, which is annoying. You could use something like this, where you have this little divot edge. You could also use something like this, just a normal loop tool to trim. My favorite one is this guy, this zebra tool, and this one just makes a nice clean cut. So I use this a lot for mine. So first I'm going to look at the flowers here. So let's bring you guys in so you can see a little bit closer. So you can see here that I have the flower, and I want to, actually that flower is a little wet still, so we're going to move over here a little more. So this leaf could be a little better. So it's a little messy on the edge, which I wasn't too worried about because I can kind of go back around the edge here like this and just carefully and purposefully remove that edge. And if I mess up, that's okay. I can go back and oh, there it is. There's the edge. So I'm going to do that on both sides. And that way my leaf is a little bit crisper looking. I like to have a dry paintbrush next to me too, so I can really get some of those crumbs out of there because we don't need those. They just get in the way. So my leaf, I want to make it look a little more like a leaf rather than just a blob. So I'm going to add a line down the middle, again with purpose. I can smooth that out. And then maybe I'll do a couple like thinner lines to show that it's a leaf a little bit more. Okay, maybe like one over here. Alright, so there's that. And I can kind of brush these guys off a little bit. Oops, I smudged it a little bit. Okay, so now you can see that I carved back through to make those veins and everything kind of pop out. And I'm going to do that on all of my pieces here. So this one that I just smudged, I'm going to carefully just kind of scrape that up. Because if you don't get the black underglaze off, like if I made a smudge over here and I leave it there, it will stay there, and when I fire it, it'll show up with a black smudge. So you want to be really sure that wherever that black underglaze is, you want to be happy with that, because otherwise it's, you know, when it comes out of the kiln, it's basically fired on there and it looks like it's a colored area. So you're going to go back through here, carve this stuff out, and I'm just going to keep doing this sort of thing where I'm just kind of revisiting the edges. And you can see I can carve multiple times. I'm also making sure not to carve through my platter, because I know how thick it is, and if I carve deeper, or I carve too deep, it will go right through the bottom. And you can fix that, but it's a pain to fix it. So we don't really want to have extra work to do that we don't need to do. This part here got a little weird, so I'm going to go back in and kind of smooth this out a little bit. Now let's say I didn't like how this turned out and I wanted to add more. I carved up too much underglaze and I wanted to add more. I could do that very easily, but remember that we don't have clay here now. It's deeper. There's a divot there. So you can do what you need to do for that to work that out. Now when I'm doing letters, like this is a little more free, but I'm going to do the letters for the Black Lives Matter in the center. But I'm a little nervous about that because I want to make sure I do it correctly and I don't mess it up. So for that, maybe I would use like a needle tool. Maybe I'll think about black has 5 letters, A is in the center, so maybe I'll start there and work my way out. If I'm doing some sort of cursive or something like that, maybe I'll write it in first. So I'm just going to start there with the A, and I'm going to just start to draw that in there. We know that that's in the center, and then I have a C and a K over here, and then I can go over here. Also make sure you're spelling things correctly, because if you're writing words, you don't want to spell them wrong. It'd be kind of embarrassing, so kind of keep that in mind as well. Alright, so here we go. We have this on there. I can kind of clean this up out of here. And it looks a little uneven, so maybe I'll elongate this K a little bit more. Fix up this L a little bit. B is a little messy. You know, I'm just going to go back through and touch up what I can. And then I'll go down here. So lives, we have a V in the center. There's that. And then I have an I over here. And L right here. It brings it down a hair. We get up this E a little bit. And then matter, we have the 2 T's in the center. So I'm going to split them here. I'm going to bring the T's down. Alrighty. So you can kind of see how this can be kind of meditative almost. Adding all of these things. Sometimes this is a little tricky with the spelling and making sure that you want to be able to read it. You don't want to have like a smudgy area to read, because then it'll be like, well, who cares? I can't read it anyway, and then people will move on. So you want to make sure you do that kind of stuff very carefully. I can just get some of this out of here. This S is a little funky, so I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Oops. And remember, if you really mess up, you could always go back and add a little bit more underglaze, which is fine, but that'll be okay for now. So this is kind of like a fun thing to do. If you would come to the GCCA camp this summer, you'll have some fun with this and get to play around with it. It's pretty satisfying to be able to carve off a layer of your design that you add on there. And it adds a whole nother element to it, because instead of it just being, you know, oh, okay, well, it's a platter and it's got some glaze thrown on top. So it's like, okay, I build it. I could just throw it right into the kiln right now, and then, you know, call it a day. And then when it comes out, I could just throw a bunch of glaze on it. But this kind of adds your own personal touch, because you're designing it yourself. You're not just letting the glaze do the work. Not that there's anything wrong with letting the glaze do the work, but, you know, it kind of creates that written style on there. So at this point, you can start to think about textures. So like over here with this guy, maybe I'll go through and add some like little X's on here, to add some like different textures, because, you know, it can be kind of boring with that flat color. So I'm going to go back through and just kind of add some texture on here. And texture can be pretty basic. Like, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like, I'm literally just drawing X's on here. And we can see, and then it's also kind of a fun thing. You like look closer and you're like, oh, okay, well, there's like a little extra design on there. So some people find that to be very fun, where you have that extra little something something in there. So I like this. I like using the needle tool when I want to add a little bit more detail, because it's such a fine design. But sometimes it can really crinkle up and get kind of funny. So you got to be careful with that. All right. So things are looking good. I have a lot more to go on this, so I will, you know, kind of keep working with it and figure out, like, maybe I actually want to bring this in here a little bit so it's like really blooming out of this. I think that will be better. Yeah, there we go. I like that better. Over here we had this smudgy flower here. So for this one, I'm actually going to take a larger tool, and I'm going to just carve off that whole area there. And over here I smudged it. So I'm just going to carve off this whole area real lightly. And there it is, all cleaned up. So this stuff can be pretty fun, and sometimes you'll get these nice little flowery trimming tools or trimming bits, which is kind of fun. You can make a whole other project out of just those. So I'm going to kind of dust that off. Maybe I'll just design this flower real quick. So maybe we have the center of the flower. We have the edges that look better than they do right now. Smudgy. And sometimes if you leave there's a lot of artists that do Sgraffito that like leave that black edge, so like you carve right through it and you leave kind of like the mess around it. That can also look really cool, because it's almost like unfinished at that point, which makes it like a whole nother level of interesting. So I'm just going to keep going with this and see where it goes, and try to add a little bit more fun textures. You could use different types of tools too, like this is a little like screw bit edge thing, so maybe that'll make a more interesting dot on here. So you can have a lot of fun with these. A couple dots. And then we'll dust them off again. I like the dusting off. It's like revealing the final design, you know? It's pretty fun. Here's another smudge. Again, definitely be careful that the smudges aren't there. So if you use underglaze, you'll know for sure, because you'll see that smudge and you'll hate it. Or at least I hate it. I mean, you might like it. But I'm gonna go in here and clean the other edge off. And you can always go back, like let's say I decided I want a little leaf here or another little bloom of flower. It's real easy. You just go back in with your underglaze, you carve back through. And I waited till my clay is called leather hard to do all this. So that's why I built this platter yesterday, because the platter I just built today is way too wet. If I try to add the underglaze, it kind of gets smeary. And then if I try to carve into it, it just kind of gets all chunky and gross. So that's why you have to kind of wait. And clay is kind of like a waiting game like that. You have to figure out when the best time to do these things are. So that's why the class is going to be 2 days long, because the first day we will focus on building the platter and designing the platter that we want, adding the feet, all that jazz. And then from there, we're going to design what's going to go on our platter, because obviously we want to have an idea before we add it. Because if we just kind of go for it, we might end up not liking it. and then, you know, it's kind of a dud. And you're just like, oh great, now I got this platter I don't even like. So you always want to think about what you're going to do first, and that's what we'll do in class. We'll have the outline of everything there, and then from that step you can go forward and say, okay, well now I know I'm going to do blah blah blah, and then I have blah blah blah, and you know, you go from there and you add more and more. So with this design, the second day you would add the underglaze when it's dry, and then you would go through what I'm covering. So this is like, if I was in the workshop, this would be my second day right now, and I would be adding the underglaze like I showed you, and also carving back through. And fixing up any issues. So a lot of times when it's drier, your whole clay platter, it's a lot easier to clean up because it's not floppy and falling apart. You can have like, oh, I have this dent over here that I don't like. You take a little water and you just kind of clean it up. So this way, the second day will be like the perfecting day. In this class, because it's only 2 days, what will happen is I will take the platters home with me, we'll get them fired, and then from there, I'll just put a clear coat of glaze over top of it, which again, it's kind of like this guy right here. So this has got that shiny clear, you can see my reflection of my window there. It's shiny and clear, and then it makes it more durable. That way you can actually put some food and stuff on there and serve. So maybe like at Christmas time I put a bunch of cookies on here, and I went to a Christmas party, I brought this with me, and that was my thing. So I could do that because it's got that clear glaze and I know it's ready to go. So for your finished platters, I would take them with me, we would fire them, they'll come out of the first firing, and it'll be more white, like the one I just showed you. This gray will be totally white then, there will be no gray. And then from that, you would, I'll put a coat of glaze on top, probably like 2 or 3 coats to make sure it's solid. And then from there, you would get it back, and you would come back into the class or to GCCA and get your stuff, which would be fine. Remember, you can go on there and sign up for the class. That's good if you do that. There's always the chance that something would happen with COVID, and the class would be canceled, but you would get a refund. So if you sign up for it now, that's great. You can hold your spot, and then you don't have to worry about it. A couple other things. So I'm going to go and we're going to finish this up, and I'll post it on my Instagram later. So if you want to see the finished product at the end there, I mean, it won't be fired or anything, but the finished design on there, because I think I'm going to add a little bit more black underglaze in here, because I feel like it looks kind of empty in here right now. So I might add a little something else in there. And then from that, if you have any other questions or comments or concerns, you can reach out to me at Morgan Mattson Ceramics on Instagram. You can also email me at morganmattsonart@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be an email about the class. It could just be an email about some clay problems you're having, or you know, if you just wanted to say that you liked the demo or whatever it is. So please feel free to reach out whenever you need to. But again, July 23rd and 24th at the GCCA is my Sgraffito Platter class. So please feel free to sign up. I hope you guys liked this demo today. I hope it helped. I hope you learned something. Maybe you didn't know what Sgraffito was before today, and now you do. So, all right. Thank you for watching.